My name is Wendy Lockyer. I'm the owner of a company called Accessibil-IT. We are located in Canada, however, we do business right across the globe. Everything we do is electronic based, so it's not any kind of an issue crossing those borders, other than, of course, the tax implications, but that's for us to worry about. And we focus purely on PDF or posted document accessibility, which is the way a lot of people like to think about it. But I'm not focusing necessarily on what we do today. I'm focusing on the decision, do you go HTML or do you go PDF? So, everyone needs a strategy. And why do people need a strategy unless they're only doing 1 or 2 documents? For these reasons. Everybody faces financial constraints, and we know that for a fact, that absolutely everybody has financial constraints. And before I got into Accessibil-IT, I was an executive at a large Canadian bank and oversaw the annual budgeting process. And invariably, it was a bun fight, without a doubt. And as you got closer and closer to the end of the budget process, you started arguing about what IT resources were available and who got what to do what. And depending on when you got that budget, that determined when you could move forward with your initiative. So there are financial constraints, there are FTE constraints, there are server capacity constraints, conflicting priorities, which is really around the developers. There's so many initiatives underway in any large organization that the developers have a much longer list of things to do than they actually have capacity to do it. That is certainly our experience in any organization we deal with. And I'm seeing a few nods, so I think people are resonating with this. And of course, there's the accessibility legislation requirements, and those requirements don't really worry too much about your budget cycle or when the IT department has resources available. So we're working with a lot of constraints, and it's every organization, no matter how large or small. And in our opinion, this is strictly our opinion, PDF is the ideal solution for organizations dealing with constraints. And why is it that we believe this? Well, let's look at the different constraints. We start with the financial budget. Everybody's allocated a certain amount of dollars. You can't exceed those dollars. Usually by the end of the budget cycle, you're very lucky if you kept the dollars that you started with. So PDF taggers are 1/4 the cost of HTML developers. And why is that? Because there are so many more initiatives underway that have conflicting priorities for the HTML developers within an organization. Plus, usually those developers are within the IT department that have the big legacy systems and all the servers, et cetera. And there's a transfer pricing system in place whereby anybody who uses the resources within an IT department, they are charged some of that overhead as well. So it's just straight economics. The developers tend to be higher skilled at what they do, and there's so much demand for their particular skill set that the price goes up. Whereas PDF taggers are actually a relatively new discipline in the marketplace, and that's all they do, really. So there isn't all kinds of conflicting priorities for their time, and that is really what makes the big difference in the cost equation. And they're not usually working in departments that have great big infrastructure, and they don't get transfer priced out at the same price. FTE. FTE from outside service providers can usually be ramped up as needed. Most service providers generally can ramp up based on client need. They can get the resources they need. Whereas often internal FTE, you're constrained by whatever FTE allocation that you were provided for the year in your budget. And you can't just go ramp up because all of a sudden you have an immediate priority that perhaps the legislation has just foisted on you. So the FTE is usually more flexible if you go outside. And I know anybody who's managing inside budgets often thinks about this choice, whether it's PDF accessibility or other things because they know they can go to an outside provider and they have more opportunity to ramp up. So this is true for PDF versus HTML. Server capacity, I'm not sure which sessions you folks have attended over the course of the day, but I know there was a session on archiving. I'm not going to go over that, but PDF does enable efficient document archiving. And I know with limited server capacity, that becomes very attractive to organizations. And then, of course, conflicting development priorities. I basically went over that already. PDF taggers focus on accessibility and nothing else. And HTML developers are pulled in every which way direction for all the major initiatives in the organization. So as you go through the constraints, and it doesn't matter what size of organization that we deal with, everybody has these constraints. And if you don't, lucky you, because in my experience, every organization has these constraints. So very quickly, how do they stack up from an accessibility standpoint? The PDFs developed, PDF UA was developed by an ISO committee. I'm sure you've heard lots about that today. It maintains document fidelity, which we know is important to many people in an organization. And the PDF can be used as a platform for other accessibility. If you start with a PDF, you can change it and convert it to Word or a DAISY player, a compatible format, Braille for a refreshable Braille display. And it's actually very quick, very easy. So a lot of organizations really like that about a PDF. You start with that as your platform. A user calls up and says, I only understand really Braille. And you can convert it very quickly so that even organizations who transcribe into a hard copy Braille format, they can do it much quicker than starting from the raw document itself. If you do this in HTML, if you do the document in HTML, you don't have the same opportunity. You have to convert it back into the document and then go through the process from there. So it's a much faster process if you start from the PDF and then convert it into all the other formats. And the PDF, particularly with the new standards PDF UA, it's just an excellent user experience. Our head of quality control is legally blind. She works day in, day out with screen readers. She sees great accessibility documents and horrible accessibility documents. And she really likes the user experience that is coming out of the PDF UA. So that is a big plus for PDF. HTML is good also. There's no question about that. But the PDF also provides a great user experience. Just a few more facts about PDF versus HTML. You can read through the chart. If your starting point is from MS Office, this is really just more about what I just said. PDF wins because you can make it so quickly accessible. It is so easy to make accessible from Word. And in design, you can also make it into a PDF that is accessible. And the XML repository, better suited for HTML. Volumes of content. We usually say if it's a document that's under 20 pages, it's about a tie. It's not that much more complicated, or it doesn't take that much longer to do an HTML than it is for PDF. But something greater than 20 pages, we generally find it's much more efficient to make it accessible from the PDF. And depending on how the content will be consumed, if it's in print, PDF, again, if it has to be in large print for low vision users or for Braille, starting from a PDF, it's very efficient to achieve that end goal. From the web, if it's posted on the web, we'd say it's a tie, no matter which way you go. If it's done properly, you're going to have a good outcome. On mobile, right now, HTML wins. They don't have terrific readers on the phones yet. One type of phone is a little better than the other types of phone. And I'm not going to push brands here, so I'm not going to go into which phones are actually better. But we do know there's a fair amount of work underway right now trying to make sure that there are high-quality readers on all phones to enable people who use adaptive technology to get their documents on their mobile. And then if it's distributed, PDF is a lot easier to distribute, obviously, than HTML. So I'm just going to walk through a few case studies just to give you some examples of organizations, large organizations such as yourselves, who have started from the beginning and said, okay, I have all these documents. Which direction am I going to go? So the business problem, National Energy Board is a government-funded organization in Canada. It's very large. It has multiple authors, which most organizations do, a very large volume of documents. They vary in size and complexity from minutes, everybody knows what standard minutes look like, to very complex documents and forms. And they're required on a very short time frame. Plus, they have to be approved by the National Energy Board. And as soon as they're approved by the National Energy Board, they have to be posted on their website within 24 hours. So they were faced with a lot of issues. First of all, they didn't have the internal skill set to actually do the work. So that was problem number one. Plus, they had all of this to contend with. So they came to us and said, we need a document accessibility strategy because we don't even know where to start, and we're a little overwhelmed with the volume and the timing and the legislation. So we went through their documents. We did an inventory of everything they need to post. We put them into buckets of very simple, medium complexity, very complex. And with the very simple, we looked for opportunities to develop templates. But we learned very quickly that if they had to post on the website 24 hours after the board meeting, there was no way they were going to make those documents accessible in that 24-hour time frame. It just wasn't happening. There was too many of them, and they had to be done too quickly. So HTML for them wasn't really an option. Part of the reason being that they didn't have developers available when they needed them. And they needed people who, as soon as there was a board meeting, could address the issue. Now, we backed them up and said, you can't get everything done overnight. It's not going to happen. You've got too many. So let's talk about the processes and how we make them accessible before they even go to the board meeting. And then if for whatever reason the board switches things up a little bit, then it'll be an emergency situation and it'll likely be a one-off, and you can get that turned around in time. So in their particular case, with all their characteristics, they faced all the constraints that we initially talked about, the budget constraints, the FTE constraints, timing, all of that. And for them and their circumstances, PDF was the route to go. A large US insurer, one of the top 4 US insurers, who have also extensive volumes of documents and forms. And if you think about an insurer, they have a number of different programs that they launch over the course of the year. As they approach the timing of launching those programs, they end up having very large volumes of, again, documents, forms, some straightforward, some very complex, some 1,000 pages, some 2 pages. And when they were looking at this issue internally, again, they went back to, do we have budget? How much budget do we have? How many internal resources could do this if we went the HTML route? And when could they be available for us? Because the people who were designing the documents, the marketing group, they needed time to design the documents, and they always felt that they were crunched, and they didn't want to be any time added to their process to allow for accessibility. So the accessibility had to be turned around very quickly. So when they went through all the criteria that we talked about, they also opted to go the PDF route because it meets, obviously, all the legislative requirements, number one, important. It meets all the usability requirements, also very important. Plus, it was much cheaper for them. And in this case, Accessibil-IT had the flexible resource pool that when we knew in that 1 month leading up to their program launch, we were going to go crazy with their particular program, but I could rearrange resources, staff up, whatever I need to do to turn this around. And they didn't have the same kind of flexibility inside. So in this particular case as well, they felt that PDF was the right route to go. Canadian Food Inspection Agency is also a Canadian government agency, and for whatever reason, they were tasked with making all of their documents HTML and PDF accessible. And the reason for that isn't entirely clear to me, but when they came to talk to us about it, they had been given this requirement. And once again, same problem, large volume of documents, varying complexity, no internal capabilities, or very few internal capabilities. They spoke to the internal team that would do it in HTML while they're already busy doing it in HTML. So they don't have the capacity to do anything beyond that. So again, we start to see the pattern of the characteristics from each company. Doesn't matter who it is, what type of business they have, they always end up looking at the same criteria in order to make a decision. And in this particular case, they compared the cost to the department who needed all this work done. And they're the ones that actually initially told us that it was PDF was 1/4 the price of the HTML. And it was for the reasons we discussed earlier. It's, you know, the transfer pricing with all the allocation of the internal overheads, the higher cost of developers than a PDF tagger. So this was very compelling. They continue to think about whether they want to maintain HTML or whether they do everything in PDF. And that's an ongoing decision. I suspect a lot of organizations think about that, whether they keep posted content or do it in HTML. But in this particular case, it was the cost implications were very attractive to go the PDF route. And a global CPA firm, we're not mentioning a name only because we didn't get all the final approvals to actually say their name in advance. So very large CPA firm, global. They launched a new website, and due to legislation, of course, they had to make it fully accessible. And they thought about it from the web development side. They knew they needed to make the code accessible, make the color contrast appropriate, all of those things. But they didn't think about the posted documents until quite late in the game. Well, their marketing department adds in a few other constraints. Well, don't tie me into a document because I might want to change this in 6 months. You know, I'm talking about this today. I might be talking about something else tomorrow. I might want to rebrand. I might want to talk about a whole different program. So we need flexibility. So again, no matter what the firm, a global CPA firm is very successful, but they don't have unlimited budget or unlimited resources. And their developers were very busy working on the new website, as well as a few other initiatives they have on the go. They were wondering where they were going to get the people. They were wondering where they were going to get all the skills, because the HTML developers said, well, we know how to make HTML accessible, but we have no idea how to make a PDF accessible. So they had their internal struggles of which type of format they wanted to use. And in the end, they wanted to keep the posted content. They wanted the flexibility to take it on and off. And they really liked the fact that PDF was coming in at a much lower cost than the HTML was going to cost them. So they went through all the same criteria. They went through the same thought process. They kept in mind that the marketing department was very clear that they would be changing documents all the time. Some would come off, new ones would come on. And they really liked our knowledge of PDF UA. We have a couple of people on that committee. So they were confident that if they went the PDF route, that they wouldn't have any troubles with end users who felt that it wasn't accessible. So they chose to go with PDF. So this is just another example, and I tried to give a good cross-section of types of organizations, government, large business, and a CPA, a service firm such as this. And we don't find that there's really any difference at all between the type of firm. It's really the same criteria, depends on the internal capabilities, what their needs are, and in the end, the decision is made whether it's PDF or HTML or both, depending on what document they're talking about. So I really just wanted to spend this time today to give you an idea of what other organizations are thinking about. I'm pretty sure whichever part of your company you're working in, you have the same kinds of conversations on an ongoing basis. And these are just 4 examples of how they went through the process of sorting out which to do and where they ended up. So with that, I will open it up for any questions, if there are any. Yes, sir, at the back.
So do you consider language to be an accessible issue that you're attempting to address with these organizations? For example, somebody gets a document in English and French, but for them accessible means they can understand it in the language they speak.
So if I'm understanding you correctly, does the organization really understand what we mean when we talk about accessibility? Is that what you're
working with these organizations
Yes.
on these problems? Are you trying to address language or just visual impairment?
Well, it's visual and cognitive. So, oh, yes. He's asking whether we're addressing the issue of language when we're dealing with these organizations, as well as for accessibility. And so normally, no matter who we deal with as well, they have multiple languages. Some organizations, like the insurance company, has probably 8 different languages that they're dealing with. They don't usually, they're not usually concerned about people getting it in the language that they understand, because they've usually already addressed that probably quite some time ago. But what they want to make sure is that we can do it in all of those languages. So whatever language that they're distributing in, they want to make sure that we're able to make it accessible.
So the assumption is that they're distributing it in the language that people would want.
Yes.
And if they're not, that's just something to be determined later.
Well, if someone, normally there is an internal department, a communications department that has identified what their end users need, and a mechanism that, in fact, if someone who speaks a completely different language needs access to the document in their language, it would be sent off to the language translation, and then it would be sent to us for accessibility conversion. Yes.
Maybe I can just add to that. Maybe.
Sure.
Canadian federal government requires you to put it in bilingual, so French, English. And in PDF UA, you can only declare one language type. So your document may be bilingual, but you end up having 2 PDF UA that will be generated as well. So that's overbearing because of the requirements of the organization sort of saying that. And then they say, we're going to set flags to the language type, but then it's still overridden by the fact that bilingualism is required.
Oh, and in many organizations, it's multilingual. But I think they have already accepted the fact that there's going to be multiple languages posted. So it's not like the accessible version isn't taking up more space than they had already been taking up. When a PDF is made accessible, that's the only document. You don't have one that's inaccessible and one that's accessible. So you're not trying to duplicate everything. There's one document of all the languages that you need to send it out in. So if there's 10 languages, then you have 10 different PDFs that are accessible.